G'day guys, this is Josh Niland here at Fish Butchery in Waterloo with a friend. This beautiful Maui cod, which has been caught for us out of the Whitsundays up in Queensland from a gentleman named Matt Calder, who I met just before opening our new restaurant, Cat's Eye Pool Club. We could actually see his boat when we were doing breakfast service. That's how impressively close he got to the restaurant. And it was probably all of an hour and a half, 2 hours later that he popped into the restaurant and showed us everything that he caught, from coral trout to this beautiful Maui cod and another fish called tomato cod. It was extraordinary what he was able to get, and everything caught on the line one at a time. He's doing the ikijimi spiking method of kill, and then he's going along and cutting the gills so that the fish is bled correctly as well, and then into a nice slurry, and then taken out, packed beautifully, head to tail, in a box, and then sent to not only Cat's Eye in a matter of hours, but to us now here in Fish Butchery. So it's a pleasure to work with a fish of this caliber. It's also quite an investment as well. This fish itself sitting here is now, what, $220. So an expensive but beautiful and valuable Australian fish. As much as this video seeks to show you the wonderful work of this particular fisherman with this particular species, don't turn off that you don't have the ability to find this specific fish. I think what's most important here, the value that I'm trying to create, is something that becomes simple to implement and a practice that you can start working with regardless of what species it is, and also regardless with what size it is. Right now we're showing you this because the optics on this fish is phenomenal. Like, it's such a beautiful fish, but as well a plate-sized snapper, you know, a beautiful flathead, a whiting, or if we're overseas, then, you know, cods, brim, whatever it is that you've got in front of you, all of this translates in some way to helping you get a superior product when you're working with fish. All right, so it seems silly, but the way I used to process fish, and probably prior to having the confidence then with any fish that comes in front of me to just launch straight into it, back when I was trying to work out a lot of cuts, what I would do is I'd draw the fish and then probably stare at it for far too long, to the point of being a little bit creepy. But it's important that you roadmap out what you want to actually achieve from one single fish, especially when you're talking about this 5 kilo fish that's got a number of different parts in it. You've got, to me personally, a Maui cod is extraordinary to eat within the first, 4 days. You'd probably find the flavor profile between days 3 and maybe 5 has this really lovely, well-rounded sweetness, very juicy, succulent, white flesh, steams beautifully, roasts incredibly well on the bone, but as well you could grill it nicely as well. But what I do know is that come day 10, 11, 12, 13, we will have a skin that's been conditioned in such a way that when we put it onto a grill or into a fry pan, we will be able to get the most pork crackling-like finish, which is extraordinary, and not to the detriment of the flesh being any dry or any concerns about that. What we've done is then increased or enhanced the glutamates that are within the fish, making the fish taste more savory. And this is done by hooking the fish and hanging it in our cool room. The cool room sits at around 0 degrees Celsius and has a consistent humidity of roughly 70 to 75%. And what that gives us is a moisture loss of approximately 2 to 2.5% of moisture per day. And through that small amount of moisture coming from the fish each day, we're left with this concentration of flavor, because where the moisture is lost, the fat that's naturally within the fish is promoted. And so you end up with all of this wonderful shellfish, almost veering into seaweed-like characteristics, becoming more and more to the forefront when you're eating it. And I always find that if you're able to taste and articulate the flavor of a fish, then isn't that better than just eating a sweet, juicy, generic, skinless, white-fleshed fish from somewhere? In terms of road mapping this fish, What I mean by that is we're going to take the scales off. That's the priority task, because if a fish like this in a very fresh state is left uncovered with the scales on and it goes into a cool room, regardless of whether or not it's got a fan inside or if it's static like the one that we've got, if you leave the scales on and the fish is exposed, then what happens is the scale sticks to the skin, and no matter how sharp your knife is or how well equipped you are to scale the fish, once that scale sticks, you'll end up, when you're cutting the scales off, you'll find that you actually cut the skin and the scale off, exposing the flesh, and that's not what we want to do. So yes, the ambition now is to just very much start with the scaling. Okay, so when the intention is to cut the scales off the fish, first thing you need is a sharp knife. So nothing too long, it doesn't need to be the extremes of length, but by all means, if that's comfortable, go for it. Nor does it need to have any flexibility to it. So you can see this one doesn't really have any flex to it at all. That's my preference, only for having greater control when I do things like this. And you can have the blade slightly wider so that you can cut more scale. When you're doing one motion, you're able to pick up more scale with a slightly wider knife. But for me, the most important thing when you're setting out to do this is that the fish is fresh. You cannot do this with an old fish, a dry fish, a fish that's been knocked around in a tub and little scales and things have flicked off in the process. The importance is that you start with this meshing of scales that's completely unobstructed by any damage, any hook marks, any bite marks. And like I said, usually a fish that sits in a tub and is bouncing against other fish, or horns are knocking other scales off, it's very difficult to find a nice rhythm that takes you from tail to head. The other part to this is there's a lot of different ways to do this, and by no means is this the perfect holy grail way. This is the way that I taught myself after watching a number of people do it when I was a younger apprentice. So I was fortunate to work with a Japanese sushi chef along with a Korean sushi chef as well, and both of them did it slightly differently, but the one thing that they were consistently doing is cutting from the tail end and working towards the head away from themselves, which is the intelligent way to do it. And less band-aids are used in the process. But for me, foolishly, the way that I taught myself how to do it was starting on this side, and I cut towards my hand. So fortunately, no severe cuts, no issues, and that's just how I do it. That's how we train the guys. I find it's the most comfortable way for me to do it. So if you've got a different way, go for it. This is how I do it. Best way to start this is without the knife. It's to first start with scissors, sharp little set of scissors. That what we want to do is just cut away anything that'll get in your way when you're setting off with the knife. So beautiful, look at that. And I mean, in between all of that, you've got all this wonderful gelatin and collagen. So don't go throwing that straight in the bin, because that could come in handy for any kind of stocks or soups that you're making to add this wonderful viscosity and thickness. Next one, I'm going to cut this off here, which is the little fin underneath. And you see I've taken that out, but what I didn't do is I left this on. So this little horn here, this is really thick, tough little bone that, in my head, I need to consider, do I cut all of it off? Do I cut some of it off? Do I leave them on? Because once you've cut something off, naturally, you can't get it back. And I know that sounds silly, but I can leave this on now, and then I can generate a cut later when we're at St. Peter. If we want to serve a beautiful little piece of the collar that's all the bones are being removed, but then there's one little handle to hang on to as a guest, and then you can enjoy it, then fortunately, I've thought about that today. And so then next week when we go and do that, they're ready for us. So just like I was saying, you need to roadmap and plan the entirety of the fish, because once the knife goes in and you've started that wheel turning, it's game on. Cool. I'll repeat it on the other side, and all I'm doing just there, you can see, I've just separated that little seam, and now cutting the rest of those fins off. And when you get a fish structurally this large, everything's that little bit trickier to cut off. But if you don't have sharp enough scissors, there's so many brands now online where you can, and they're not even overly expensive, but find something that's comfortable, because the more of these videos that we do, you'll find that I actually use scissors a lot, because it actually becomes very defined work, and it's a little less risky than using knives for every single task. So I'm going to come in down here. And again, cut that off. And down the back of the fish. Almost there. All right, you'd think it was 4 meters long, but we made it. This is it here. So these are, just the dorsal of the fish, basically. But again, nothing that you should be throwing away, because even if we go really close up on this camera, you can see all of this, jelly-like flesh that's sitting in between. The second that hits hot water, stock, everything's just going to come out of it. You're going to benefit so much from the texture that it gives you. Next one, we're going to leave the tail on just for something to hang on to. But you can see all the way around now, we're all trimmed and ready to go. So I got Claudia on a handheld camera, so she's going to come around this side, and we're going to have a look at where we actually start. So hook around this way, and we've even got a milk crate for her to stand on as well. So this here, you can nearly see all of these scales mesh themselves together, and they draw down towards the tail. These are all held together almost like honeycomb. So if you can imagine what honeycomb looks like, and then put a scale over the top of it, and then interlock them and mesh all the way down to the bottom. That's how these are sitting. Maui cod, like coral trout, like most of those beautiful reef swimming fish, have got relatively tiny scales, which, you could argue is maybe slightly challenging to get off as opposed to large scales, but I actually find it simpler, because the larger the scale gets, especially on fish like a wild mulloway or a wild barramundi, we're talking about the size of dinner plates. These are huge scales. And once you're on a run with those big scales, oftentimes, regardless of how sharp your knife is, your knife can deviate at times, and it's quite risky. At times, your knife can end up all over the place. So for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the blade right at the very tail, somewhere where it's not going to affect the outcome of the center of the fish. So this is almost a way of getting your eye in without doing monetary damage that's irreversible. So fingers crossed. Okay. So, first of all, I've just managed to put that in there. So I'll lift that up there, and you can sort of see what's happening. You can even see as I flex that back, the way that the little scales start to poke themselves out. And left behind then is the remnants of that pattern that the scales have created. So we're going to continue this cut, and I always keep the fish quite forward on the bench, so that I can, position my body in a way where I'm not reaching for it. And I put my hand behind so that I can just get a bit of a roll on. And as it catches, then I'm applying pressure that pushing the blade this way, but then the soaring motion of back and forth is what's moving the knife through the scale. And as well, I'm angling the blade up, because if you stay straight or you angle down, naturally you're going to hit the skin and you're going to end up with a hole, which isn't the worst thing, but it's also frustrating. We go in and again, just stay in a relatively straight line. And if you find the knife flicks out all of a sudden and, you break that beautiful, line that you've created, if you come out, go back in, it's fine. I mean, we're trying to give you a look at a very long strip of scale, which will look quite impressive, but how long the scale that gets cut off is not as impressive as having a fish that's beautifully scaled with no holes in it. So don't worry about if you can do it in one shot or not. So as I come to the end here, this idea of the hand being where the blade is, as I get higher on the fish, my hand is coming lower and lower. So I'm finishing now with my hand all the way at the bottom, so it's well clear if the blade does indeed just shoot out. So as I come to this point, I'm using the collar bone at the end to run my knife up against, and then I'm able to pick this up, and I'm just going to use the scissor to cut this. Now, this is, maybe the new line for Gucci that they could consider for a beautiful handbag, but this is a perfect strip of scale. And you can see that, and you can see the beautiful colouring that was once on the fish. For a lot of us, we think when you see a fish like this, immediately you go, oh, why did you cut the skin off? And for us, the skin is there. The skin is actually white. It's beautifully white. And what this is, all the patterning here, that is the membrane that holds the colouring and the pattern of the fish. But as well as that, it plays home to where the scale is. So what I'm going to do now is I'll start to pull at this, and you can see these little scales, almost like popcorn, start presenting themselves. But as well as that, from the underside, you can see that honeycomb that I was talking about. It almost looks like tripe. So as I keep pulling these scales, look at that. So as you pull, all these little scales are flicking out. But that pocket, what I'm trying to explain with that pocket is that if you were using a big, scaler and you're clawing away at this fish, obviously you can use one of those scalers to scale fish. That's no problem. We've got them here as well. But you've got to do so gently, because they can create a lot of damage texturally to the fish. That if you really get at it and you're just clawing away at it, what happens is you bruise the flesh. And if you leave that a day or two, that bruising becomes soft, the texture's completely compromised, and you're eating something which is not what it could have been. And it's very difficult that if you've never experienced the real firmness and beauty of a fish like this that's been handled perfectly, then I can't actually explain to you the sheer benefit of it. But if you do pay attention to the variable of knowing that if you do claw at it, knock it around, throw it in a tub, and mishandle it, inevitably it's a state of subtraction where it just continually gets more and more average. Whereas we're trying to remain excellent. For a $220 fish, I want to know every single detail along the way, so that we give you something, extraordinarily delicious and texturally unlike anything you've had before when you come to the restaurant. When we buy a fish at Fish Butchery, we receive it whole, scales on, gut in, untouched, perfectly handled. From there, we take the scales off in a fashion very similar to this, where we cut the scales from the fish. Once that's done all over, we'll wipe it down with paper towel. We'll take the organs out of the fish. We'll sort through all of that and put those parts of the fish to work. And then what's left then is the whole fish that's clean and ready to go. We put a hook in the tail and we hang it in our cool room that sits at approximately 0 degrees Celsius. And from there, it's our responsibility as fish butchers within this business to then discern what the magic spot is for that fish to get it on the menu at St. Peter or get it into the box here and serve it as a retail product. The only way that we can do that and have that level of control is by not washing the fish. That's it. It's really as simple as that. And I suppose this is the one single variable we pay attention to the closest, that I feel like, commercially speaking, across the board, any marketplace you go to in the world, there's a tap running and there's a hose washing something. I mean, even if it's a whole fish looking as amazing as this, that'll be sitting on the counter on ice, and then every half an hour or so somebody will have a wander along and give everything a quick spritz with water to make it look as if it had just come out of the water. So it's held in this false sense of freshness, or this inevitable state of mediocrity, that this is what we're trying to pay attention to. So to explain to you that if you scale the fish conventionally or slightly unconventionally, in the sense of cutting the scales off, what I implore you to do as the first thing that you ever try to do or attempt to do with a fish is just don't wash it. Just wipe it off with paper towel and then pop it in the fridge. Leave it unwrapped, leave it uncovered. Even if it's a little flathead, you scale it, you wipe it, you take the fillet off, and then just pop it in the fridge. Leave it for half an hour, leave it for an hour, leave it overnight, and then just see how different that is, how vastly superior that is to not only enjoy eating, but to actually enjoy cooking. And I think if you went into a meat butcher and you bought a sirloin steak that had been rinsed under a tap, served to you off ice and wrapped in plastic, chucked in a paper bag, and then you take it home to then open it up and put it in a hot fry pan or on a hot grill, I promise you that steak is going to be so miserable to not only eat, but you're not going to have fun cooking it. You're not going to be able to develop that beautiful crust that is so familiar when you're grilling a piece of meat, to get that caramelization and those lovely toasty, crispy little bits. Sure, you might get some, but by adding more moisture to a product, you're doing yourself a disservice in terms of achieving a great outcome. So test it out, give it a go. I'm going to do a video later of what it looks like to cook a wet fish in a fry pan, and then what it looks like to cook a fish prepared in this way. And I hope that I can really do my method service in the process, but it doesn't make sense. The second you wash a fish, you've literally set the timer for how long you've got to work with it. So this idea of fresh fish having a 2 to 3 day shelf life is ludicrous. We've all experienced, a fish like this where it's fresh, sweet, juicy, white flesh, but then if we've handled it correctly, we haven't washed it, and it has been incredibly well handled in the right conditions, then what you find is you've got the fish for a little bit longer. It tastes a little bit more delicious, and then all of a sudden then it's not as intense a feeling of like, oh my gosh, this fish is going to spoil and go bad. How am I going to use all of this in the space of 3 days? So from a small business perspective, when I first opened St. Peter, to buy a 20 kilo beautiful big fish, how do I sell that in 3 days in a restaurant that only seats 34 guests? So really my brain was trying to process, well, if I take off the most critical parts of the fish first, as in the head, the organs, and the most perishable items, then I put that to work on day one, just like a pig. You take the legs off, you salt them, you get them ready for prosciutto, and then, the organs come out and you might make a sausage, you might just pan fry the liver and enjoy it on toast. But there has to be a plan, and the plan is in place so that you then realize the whole value of the fish, because 12, 15 days later on that 20 kilo fish, we might only just then be serving that beautiful fillet on the bone. And this is as much an economical decision as it is an ethical one, because there's no point buying this $220 fish and then only getting $90 return for it. So my point is, don't wash your fish and you'll be able to use it for longer, it'll taste better, and you'll have more fun doing it. And the bench is all the cleaner for it. You don't have scales in the curtains. Good luck. Take a look at that. That's a beautiful Maui cod that's now been knife scaled from tail right through to head. And you can see I've actually gone to the trouble of taking all of that scale off the head as well, because this is probably the best window of time to do that. If you're wanting to use the head for steaming so that you can pick the meat from it, or even cut the cuts out of the head as well, super important to get rid of the scales early while the fish is fresh, because again, once it hangs and you've got, time starts to dry the scale to the skin itself, when you go and try to cut that off later, or even use a scaler to brush it off later, you'll end up tearing the skin and you'll expose the flesh. So I've gone to the trouble of doing that. Okay guys, so that was scaling of a fish, and so we've knife scaled this amazing Maui cod from top to bottom, and I've gone along, I've gutted, I've wiped, and hooks in the tail ready to go away into the cool room. Just overview, really important that you don't wash your fish. So important. If you want to enjoy cooking a fish and you want to enjoy eating that product at the end, steer clear of it. It's not to say that you've got to go home and start knife scaling all the fish that you want to eat in a week. Just ask the guys that you're buying the fish from to just turn the tap off, scale it for you. Even if there's a bit of scale left on the surface or a bit of blood in the cavity, just leave it there, wrap it up, and when you get home, get paper towel, wipe it off, and then you're in the exact same place as I am right now. But just make sure to keep the water off the fish and just give it a go, give it a practice. Doesn't matter if you end up with a few holes. Even after 20 years cooking, I still end up with the hole on the other side. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.